We're very pleased to have Mexico's Deputy Minister of Foreign Trade, Juan Carlos Baker, here with us this afternoon. Juan Carlos has built his career over more than 20 years inside of Mexico's Ministry of the Economy, where he's held a variety of positions related to the economic relationship with North America and the rest of the world, where his work has supported the country's economic relationships globally. He is a graduate of the Tec de Monterrey and also completed studies at the University of Warwick, and we're very pleased to have him here representing the Ministry of the Economy this afternoon. So without any further ado, I will turn the floor over to Juan Carlos Baker. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I know the time is very limited, so I will be very brief in my comments. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation on behalf of Secretary Ildefonso Guajardo, myself, obviously the Ministry of the Economy. It's good to be here, and it's good to be with so many friends that I have known for many years now, so many friends that I have had the opportunity to work here in San Diego and also in Mexico City. In a previous life, I had the privilege to serve as Director General for North America for 7 years. So I usually twice a year went through the length and breadth of the border, usually starting here in Tijuana, San Diego, and ending up 10 days later in the other side of the border in Brownsville, Matamoros. So that always gave me a very good sense of how the relationship between the two countries was going at that particular time. I have always believed that the border is the point where our two countries meet, not the line that divides us. And just coming here and using the CBX Express crossing that I had also the opportunity to see from the very moment that it was planned on the blueprints, and now seeing it in full operation, it really reinforced to me again that idea. The line that brings us together is the border. So again, I won't really tell you much, or I won't really get into the details or giving you numbers of how important our trading relationship is, or how we are currently at a moment on which the pillars and the foundations of what we have worked for in the past 2 decades are at peril. I think that some of the speakers that predecessed me had already touched upon that. What I will tell you, though, just briefly sharing my own personal views and those of the Ministry of the Economy regarding precisely that question that was posed in the program. What comes ahead? What is going to happen in the next few weeks or months? And well, naturally, playing a little bit like the oracle, the reality is that I don't know. I couldn't really tell you in full detail what's going to happen. But being a very responsible public officer, accountable to the Mexican citizens, I think it's our responsibility to be prepared for every possible scenario that is conceivably out there in terms of the NAFTA. And I'm just going to restrict my comments to the economic and trade relationship, which is the responsibility of my portfolio. The larger question as to what's going to happen between the US and Mexico, or what's going to happen in North America, also lies in part in you. Lies in what the stakeholders, what the believers in this powerful partnership that we have are also going to do. But we'll get into that before I close. Again, well, how do we get to this point? How did we went from having the most dynamic, the most brand new trade agreement to the point right now where we are, that NAFTA has become such a word, really. Some of the speakers previously were saying that the fact that we never spoke about renegotiating the NAFTA was only normalizing the situation that we are in currently. And I at that moment remembered that it was in the past more than once suggested that we needed to upgrade the NAFTA. We never really spoke about renegotiation of the NAFTA, because renegotiation in terms of semantics really is about someone getting more of the agreement than what the other party is getting, and we don't agree with that view. NAFTA has been a sound success for all its partners, and the numbers are there. Again, I won't get into those. But I do believe, regardless of several attempts in the past of coming up with new ideas as to how to make North America more competitive, I do believe that at some point we took each other for granted. And I do not mean to reflect that in this particular geographical location, because Tijuana, San Diego, the Cali Baja region, by far is an example of how our two countries are really intertwined. But for so many years, really, we had different agendas, and the items that were there, the items that we were seeing, and the business community knows this very well, the items that were needed to keep North America at the edge of competitiveness vis-a-vis other regions were not necessarily addressed in the right way. But having said that, the truth is we are where we are. And as we got into these discussions or into these reflections as to what to do with the NAFTA, what to do with North America, especially in a circumstance where there are so many half-truths, misconstructions, or blatant lies about what the NAFTA represents, the question comes, what do we do? And I need to be very honest with you, and the reality is that as of now, despite the rhetoric or despite what you may have heard in the news, I do not have a single letter outlining the objectives of the U.S. in this so-called renegotiation of the NAFTA. I do not have any paper with ideas. I do not have any indication of what the U.S. Government or the U.S. administration, rather, would like to see in such a review. I just crossed the border, as I mentioned to you. The trucks carrying goods keep flowing to the border. The numbers for our 2016 trade figure just came out last week. So despite all of that, the reality keeps imposing itself. Reality is very stubborn, and reality keeps imposing itself in terms of our global value chains being linked, our companies being intertwined and doing business in both sides of the borders, and in Canada as well. I'll get into that point in a few minutes too. I was in Toronto last week with Secretary Guajardo and Secretary Videgaray to meet our Canadian friends. So again, just without really knowing what's going to be ahead in the future because of this absence of a clear proposal or some ideas, that nonetheless is not something that the Mexican government feels comfortable of not doing nothing. So since we don't know what our partners want to do, we went the other way around, trying to decide what Mexico was able to discuss, what Mexico was unable to discuss, and what were the items that clearly were off the table. So based on that, President Peña Nieto delivered a very powerful speech that if some of you may have seen it, if not, I invite you to look at the transcript or see the video on YouTube. And in that speech, President Peña Nieto instructed us to conduct the relationship with North America, especially the US, based on 5 principles and 10 objectives. Now, all of those principles and objectives are really horizontal in nature. They touch upon migration, security, and other issues. For the sake of this discussion, I will just mention to you those that are related to trade. First one is, Mexico is not about to entertain any conversation whatsoever that implies doing away our free trade. So if we're speaking about, if the conversation, when that conversation, comes to happen, if the discussion is about whether Mexico is going to pay 20 or 25% of tariff, if Mexico is about to enter into schemes of managed trade or voluntary export restriction, it's going to be a very short discussion because we just won't get into that. You know, the last time, and I remember because I was there, the last time the US and Canada phased out its tariffs to Mexico in 2003. Mexico phased out its own tariff to the US and Canada in 2008. So that means that there's over a decade or 15 years on which tariffs are unheard of in North America. Even if you go around and you ask business people, okay, so how about the tariff? They will even look at you awkwardly. Why? Why would I pay a tariff? It's something unheard of. And businesses have factored in that reality in their operations. So that's principle number one. Principle number two, related to trade, of those that President Peña Nieto outlined a few weeks ago, is that any discussion, as it was also suggested, it was also stated earlier today, certainly the NAFTA is 23 years old. There are many things that we can do in that regard. There are many provisions that either didn't exist or we were not able to get into the agreement back then, but 2017 looks different now. So are we open to have a discussion on that? Absolutely. But again, it's about going forward. If the discussion is about picking up the NAFTA and deciding which chapters we're going to rip off because we don't like them anymore, again, it's going to be a very short discussion. But if the discussion goes on the sense of how do we manage our border, how do we make it an element of competitiveness, how do we incorporate elements such as the treatment of state-owned enterprises, how do we make sure that trade remedy laws and similar provisions do not affect or are used to address issues regarding unfair trade practices from other countries, how do we incorporate the energy, telecommunications, and many other items that are out there, the reality of the day-to-day operation of businesses that are not present in NAFTA, then that's a discussion that we want to have. And Mexico has its own ideas, the US does as well, and the Canadians do as well. So that's a negotiation that we want to talk about. But again, if it's about going backwards, then that's not something that we are able to entertain. And the third principle, this is very important, NAFTA by nature has three partners: Canada, Mexico, and the US. After a very long, hard negotiation, a deal was struck 23 years ago. An agreement is that. By definition, an agreement is an agreement. Everyone agrees on what was in that text. In order to redo that again, we need to have the three partners at the table. And recently there was this, some of the elements as well that were mentioned earlier today as to whether the discussion was going to be bilateral or trilateral or what have you. The reality, I believe, is that as of now at least, the instrument that rules our trading relationship is composed by three members. So any changes, any updates, any reviews, any fill in the blank of the word that you want to use for the process has to be agreed upon the three partners. Now, those are the principles that Mexico is following, again, in this discussion that hasn't happened yet, and we don't really know when that is going to happen. Which takes me to the second point, and I will just make two quick comments here before closing. The expectations or the possibilities of a discussion taking place soon, I believe, are not there. If the U.S. wishes to follow the Trade Promotion Authority procedures, the TPA procedures, that will require some consulting, public consulting to do in the U.S. Just the beginning of the conversation would take, the consultations, will take a period of 90 days. So assuming that President Trump notifies Congress its wishes to start the negotiation, and that triggers a 90-day consultation period, it will take you down to June. And if it happens 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, 1 month from now, just keeps adding. The 90-day period consultation, it's a requisite in the TPA legislation, and it's something that the U.S. has to fulfill. Again, it is hypothetical discussion because we don't know for sure. So what we're doing in Mexico, what are we doing? How do we prepare for this situation, or how do we prepare for this circumstance for the day that it comes? And we started a process of consultation with the private sector. So I have spent a lot of time, and my boss has spent a lot of time, my team as well, in terms of actually sitting down with the business organizations, with the, many of the several representations of our stakeholders, the Senate and so on, asking them, okay, so imagine for 1 second, what would you like to see, again, following these principles in the NAFTA for the future? How do we upgrade that? Give me your ideas. And to tell you the truth, the response has been fantastic. We are getting a lot of ideas because certainly once that the agreement has been enforced for this long, we know by experience what can be done better. So we're taking those inputs. It's a consultation process that it will continue. It's a consultation process that it will also give us some ideas on terms of what are our own topics, are our own responsibilities, and our own desires to have in this new agreement that we will have hypothetically again. That goes hand in hand with another strategy that President Peña Nieto has instructed to us, which is to, well, be prepared for the situation in which either the negotiation or these talks do not fulfill their objective, or if one of the parties, and we know which one we're talking about, decides to, well, take the other way. Which again I must underscore, Mexico is not going to negotiate something just for the sake of something. If that is the case, that either the principles are not met, or what we see in those talks goes against our national interest, well, that's something that we are prepared for. And this is where also the other situation or the other policy that we are following also comes into play, which is to diversify our commerce, to diversify our sources both of supply and also of exports. You know that Mexico is a very open nation. We have 12 free trade agreements with 46 countries. And right now we're in the process of deepening our relationship with the European Union. We expect to have a good agreement with them closed by the end of this year. Tom was mentioning already the agreement that Canada has reached with the European Union. Certainly we are looking at that as an inspiration to also have very high levels of ambition in our current trade with the EU, which is $65 billion. It's not small. Well, everything is small compared with the trade that we have in the NAFTA, but $65 billion, again, currently is not a small figure. Likewise, we are reaching out to our partners in Latin America. We're trying to get the negotiation with Brazil and with Argentina, interesting markets that for some years, well, they were distracted. They were occupied with a different agenda, but it's good to see them back. Mexico never really left. As you can see in our dealings in the Alianza Pacifico with Colombia, Peru, and Chile, we have always maintained a strong footing in Latin America. They're our friends, our partners, and they certainly are eager to help. Asia Pacific, and for a community here in San Diego, Tijuana, it's very important to have the look towards Asia Pacific. The fact that the TPP sadly did not go through as we planned does not mean that Mexico is going to turn its back to Asia Pacific. Right now we only have an agreement with Japan, again very successful, $26 billion in trade, but that's the only one that we have. Other markets, Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, many of them still hold a very good opportunity for our products and also sources of investment in our country. So the fact that the TPP, as I said, didn't go through as we planned, that doesn't mean that Mexico is going to turn its back to Asia Pacific. It's very important. The largest markets are there, both in terms of GDP growth, but also in terms of consumers. Those are the markets that are growing. So as you can see, Mexico is preparing in several fronts for the situation that we currently have. On the one hand, doing our due diligence, stating clearly what are our objectives and what are the red lines that we cannot cross. Preparing also to have second options in terms of reaching out to other markets and other friends as well. And I also should say in doing our homework internally, in strengthening our domestic market, in making sure that several of the things that we know in Mexico can be done better, are do so better. I will stop here. I will just tell you that despite the temptation, despite how it might seem appealing right now to take a very strong radical view of the current situation, as you can see, we are on the opposite side. We are giving a lot of careful and dedicated thought to the options that we have. Certainly Mexico does not want to depart or to have a trade war with the US. That's not something that it's in our interest. But as I was saying, as responsible public officers, we need to be prepared for every scenario. And right now, that's what we are dedicating our time to prepare. I also believe that this is the moment where our allies need to speak up. I heard in previous panels too about who's going to make Mexico's case in Washington. And I fully agree with everything that was said. But it's not only about doing the case in Washington. It's about doing the case in Chicago. It's about doing the case in Los Angeles. It's about doing the case in Houston. It's about doing the case in North Dakota, in Nebraska, in Iowa, in all those places where maybe they are not as aware of the close relationship and the benefits that those communities have by being close to Mexico, as maybe San Diego, Tijuana does realize that. So it's a process of educating, sure. It's a process of putting out the facts and the figures, absolutely. And we will do so. Our private sector, we will do so. Our stakeholders also will do so. But we need your support. We need here in the US also our allies to make the case of how we are better by being together with our Canadian friends as well than being apart. Thank you so much for the invitation.